They didn't invite me to the family legacy dinner. They invited my brother to sign the papers. At 11:03 p.m., my mother texted me, "It's over between us. Don't contact me again." What she didn't know, I run ethics and risk at a Fortune-listed firm, and I had already timestamped their entire plan. If they wanted to end it in private, I would answer in public. My name is Sloane Avery. I am 31 years old, and I was on night duty at the Northvale Systems campus when my family legally erased me. My office on the 40th floor is a glass box of controlled silence. It's where I live, mostly, as the head of ethics and risk. I monitor the quiet hum of global operations, the digital pulse of a Fortune-listed entity. The view from here isn't of Westvale, the affluent suburb where I grew up. It's of the sprawling, anonymous grid of the city, a network of lights and data streams that, unlike people, rarely lie. The air is filtered to a sterile chill, smelling faintly of ozone and industrial-grade coffee. While my family was dining, I was 2 time zones away, tracking a potential Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violation in our Singapore office, my screen reflecting nothing but code. Then my personal phone, set to silent, lit up on the dark composite of my desk, a vibration, sharp and intrusive. It was a group message, from my aunt. The image that loaded was bright, warm, and nauseatingly professional. It was the private dining room at the New Alder Club, a place I knew well. You couldn't get a reservation there unless your name was already etched into the town's history. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy walnut, reflecting the light from the centerpiece chandelier, a modern monstrosity of cascading crystal shards that looked like suspended, unmelting ice. Around the table sat my family, my mother, elegant and severe in dark silk, my aunt, flushed with wine, and my brother, Dylan, the centerpiece, smiling with an easy confidence he hadn't earned. He was leaning over a thick stack of documents, a heavy, expensive-looking pen in his hand, caught in the act of signing the last page. A leather-bound folio lay open. They were all beaming at him, a celebration. I stared at the photo. The exclusion was so complete, so blatant, that it was almost comical. They hadn't just not invited me. They had staged a celebratory photo shoot of my replacement. This wasn't an oversight. This was a performance. Before I could even process the image, a second notification flashed. My aunt, again, this time, on Instagram. She had posted the same photo, but this one was wider, capturing the whole table, the champagne bucket, the air of smug finality, the caption, "Public for all of Westvale to see," read, "Finally, the family name is safe." Safe, a risk management term. Safe from what? Or more accurately, safe from whom? I was still looking at the word safe when my phone vibrated again, this time with the brutal efficiency of a direct message. My mother, not in the group chat, where my silence would be noted. This was a private execution. The text contained 6 words. "It's over between us. Don't contact me again." I read it twice. My professional training kicked in, analyzing the communication for what it was. Not an emotional outburst, a legal directive. It's over between us. A declarative statement of severance. Don't contact me again. A cease and desist. And the punctuation, a period. Not the chaotic spray of exclamation points she usually favored. Not the cowardly ellipsis. A single, deliberate, final full stop. My office felt colder. The ventilation system kicked on with a low, ambient sigh. I did not cry. My pulse, I noted, remained a steady 62 beats per minute. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold pressure behind my sternum, but I processed it as I would any other hostile event. This was an action. It required a response. I turned back to the first photo, the one my aunt had sent by mistake, meant, no doubt, for some other celebratory group chat that excluded me. A sloppy error. In my world, sloppy errors are how empires fall. I saved the image, airdropped it to my secure work terminal, and opened it on a 40-inch, high-resolution monitor. I bypassed the faces. I wasn't interested in their expressions of triumph, I was interested in the hardware of my own destruction. I zoomed in, pushing the pixels until the image blurred, then pulling back to the sharpest possible focus. The light from the icy chandelier was perfect, illuminating the top right corner of the document Dylan was signing. The header was in a heavy serif font, "Irrevocable Transfer Instrument," and just below it, a watermark, faint but unmistakable, the stylized A of the Alder Trust. These were not just words, they were mechanisms. Irrevocable, a word that means you cannot go back. Trust, a legal entity designed to hold assets, to protect them, to distribute them according to a set of rules. Rules that, as of tonight, I was no longer a part of. They had transferred everything, the family company, the properties, the legacy, all of it, to him. My mind was clear. The shock had burned off, leaving only a cold, bright clarity. I picked up my desk phone, the encrypted VoIP line I use for sensitive calls. I dialed the new Alder Club. The concierge answered on the first ring, his voice smooth and accommodating. "New Alder Club, how may I assist you?" "Good evening," I said. My own voice was level, calm, perhaps a little tired from a long shift, the perfect voice of a corporate functionary doing a routine check. "This is Sloan Avery calling from Northvale Systems. I'm in our finance department, just reconciling some evening expenses for our executive team. I believe you have one of our accounts dining in your main private room, Table 14. A guess, but an educated one. Table 14 was the room with the walnut and the ice. A pause, the quiet tapping of a keyboard. "Yes, Ms. Avery, the Avery party. They are still with us. Is there an issue with the card?" "Not at all," I said breezily. "Just a small internal compliance matter. Our system needs the itemized receipt to close out the file for the night. Could you possibly email a PDF copy to me? The address is savery@northvalesis.com. I used my work email. I used my corporate title. I created a paper trail that began with their assumption of my irrelevance and my assumption of authority. "Of course, Ms. Avery, one moment." Less than a minute later, a new email pinged in my inbox. Subject, Folio 771B, Table 14. I opened the PDF. The total was staggering, enough to fund a small startup seed round. But the total wasn't the point. I scanned the itemized list: oysters, lobster, prime rib, and the wine. 3 bottles of Chateau Margaux 1990. A vintage my father had saved. One he'd always said was for a real family milestone. My eyes went to the bottom of the receipt. Payment method: Amex, Core P. Cardholder: mother's name. Account: Alder & Co., Foods, Corporate AC. My breath caught. Not a gasp, just a pause. They didn't even pay for it themselves. They used the company, my father's company. They used corporate funds to host the celebration of my disinheritance. This was no longer a family drama. This was a breach of fiduciary duty. This was a misappropriation of corporate assets. This was a textbook case of conflict of interest, executed with the sloppy arrogance of people who believe they are above the rules. I turned to my secure audit management system, a proprietary tool I'd built for tracking the most sensitive internal investigations at Northvale. It was encrypted, air-gapped from the main network, and accessible only by me. I clicked New Case File. A blank field blinked, waiting for a title. I typed, Event, Alder Transfer, Evidence Set. One by one, I uploaded the components of my new reality. Evidence A1 Group Message 2302. JPG, the photo of Dylan signing. Evidence A2, Social Media Ant, 2303. PNG, the public Instagram post. Finally, the family name is safe. Evidence A3 Direct Text Mother 2303. PDF, a time-stamped, hashed PDF of my mother's severance text. Evidence A4 New Alder Club Receipt 2305. PDF, the itemized receipt, showing corporate card usage. Evidence A5, Analysis Zoom. Irrevocable, PNG, the zoomed-in crop of the document, irrevocable transfer instrument, and Alder Trust. I stared at the 5 files, lined up in neat chronological order. They thought they were having a private dinner. They thought they were signing private papers and sending private texts. They didn't realize that in my world, nothing is private. Everything is data. Everything is a record. They wanted to cut me out. They wanted to make this about emotion, about family, about blood. They wanted me to cry, to beg, to be broken. I closed the case file and locked my workstation. The blue light of the monitors snapped off, plunging the office into near darkness, lit only by the distant, uncaring grid of the city. I typed one last sentence into my private notes, a simple thesis for the work ahead. If they make it about blood, I will make it about records. To understand the document Dylan was signing, you have to understand the product my family sells. And I don't mean the artisanal baked goods and overpriced pantry staples that fill the shelves of Alder & Co. Foods. The real product, the one that built the new Alder Club and paid for the walnut paneling, is the Avery legacy. Alder & Co. Foods was my father's creation. He built it from a single Westvale bakery into a regional specialty foods distributor. It was his passion, his obsession, and ultimately, his prison. As his health declined over the last 3 years, my mother, whose name had never been on anything other than a joint bank account, maneuvered herself into the position of honorary chair. It is a title I am familiar with from my work at Northvale Systems. Honorary chair is corporate governance code for power without legal accountability. It grants the ability to influence strategy, approve expenditures, and set the cultural tone, all while remaining insulated from the fiduciary responsibilities that bind a CEO or CFO. From this protected perch, my mother managed the family's primary asset, the legacy. And every legacy requires an heir. My brother, Dylan, was groomed for inheritance from birth. I was groomed for administration. Dylan was taught how to command a room, how to give a firm handshake, how to remember the names of bankers. I was taught how to type, how to balance a ledger, and how to be supportive. When I excelled in mathematics, I was told I'd make an excellent controller for Dylan's company. When Dylan failed his first-year economics midterm, my mother declared he had the big-picture mind of a true visionary and that details were for staff. I am staff. This hierarchy wasn't just spoken, it was documented. It exists in the physical archive of our family history. I've reviewed the data. In the Avery family photo albums, spanning 3 decades, Dylan appears in the center of the frame in 92% of all photographs. He is seen shaking hands with the mayor, cutting ribbons, holding trophies he didn't win, and in the later years, standing beside my father, his hand placed proprietorially on his shoulder. My placement in these photos is purely compositional. I am on the edge, used to balance the shot, often slightly blurred as the focus was locked on my brother. I was the visible, yet invisible, daughter, the fixed asset required to present the image of a family, but not a stakeholder in the entity itself. My father knew. He was the only one who saw the disparity. He was the one who funded my education, who read my papers on derivative risk, who seemed, in his lucid moments, genuinely proud. Everything will be fair in the end. Sloan. He told me one night, long after my mother had gone to bed. We were in his study, the smell of old paper and leather in the air. He looked tired, the illness already hollowing him out. It will all be equitable. You're the smart one. You understand the numbers. A promise, a verbal commitment. But in business, as in law, an unrecorded promise is just noise. He got sicker. The fog rolled in. The man who built an empire on meticulous contracts and binding agreements became silent. And in his silence, my mother's interpretation of the Avery legacy became the only one that mattered. They didn't want me in the family business. My mother said I was too rigid, that my obsession with rules made people uncomfortable. She meant I asked too many questions about expense reports and vendor contracts. So I was pushed out. It's better for you, Sloan, my mother had said, steering me toward the corporate world. Alder & Co. is a family. You're more suited for an office. She was right. I studied forensic accounting. I didn't just get a CPA. I became a certified fraud examiner. I specialized in the complex, algorithm-driven world of corporate compliance. I didn't just join an office. I joined Northvale Systems, a global technology conglomerate where my rigidity was seen as an asset. My obsession with rules wasn't a personality flaw. It was the core job requirement. Now, as head of ethics and risk, I don't just suit the office, I run it. I am the final word on regulatory compliance for 40,000 employees across 12 countries. My family, in their eagerness to sideline me, had inadvertently paid for the most advanced level training in how to dismantle operations exactly like theirs. The irony was not lost on me, but I never mentioned it. I let them believe I was a glorified bookkeeper, a corporate drone safely tucked away in a distant city, too busy and too intimidated to pay attention to their cozy Westvale kingdom. This invisibility became my primary tool. I still carry the Avery name, but at every public event, every charity gala, every feature in the Westvale Gazette praising Alder & Company's community involvement, I was systematically erased. 2 years ago, Alder & Co. was given the Legacy Business Award by the local Chamber of Commerce. My mother and Dylan accepted it on stage. My mother gave a speech, her voice thick with practiced emotion, about passing the torch to the next generation. Dylan stood beside her, nodding, the perfect image of the dutiful son. I was there. I was seated at table 19 in the back, near the kitchen. I had purchased my own ticket. Neither of them acknowledged my presence from the stage. After the ceremony, a local banker, a man who had known me since I was a child, walked past me, clapped Dylan on the back, and said, "Congratulations on keeping the family name alive." He looked straight through me as if I were a ghost. That was the night I stopped seeing it as a family matter and started treating it as a long-term investigation. The philosophical divide between my mother and me was absolute. I remember the last time I tried to intervene, about a year ago. I had noticed irregularities in their inventory write-offs, a classic, simple way to skim profits. I scheduled a call. "Sloan, darling, you don't understand," she'd said, her voice laced with that patronizing sweetness she mistakes for warmth. "These are adjustments. Things are different in a family company. It's not your cold corporate world." "A write-off is a write-off, Mother," I'd replied, my tone as level as my office desk. "The IRS doesn't have a family exemption." She sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Assets need a man to protect them. Sloan, it's about strength, about intuition. Dylan has that. He protects the legacy." I looked at the data I had on my screen, a spreadsheet showing inflated vendor costs paid to a shell company I'd traced in 10 minutes. "Assets don't need a man, Mother," I said, closing the file. "They need clean records." The call ended. She called me ungrateful. I called her exposed. Not out loud, of course. I didn't argue. Arguing with my mother is like trying to audit a feeling. It's pointless. They operate on a system of emotion, tradition, and willful ignorance. I operate on a system of verifiable data, regulations, and consequences. So I let them talk. I let them have their dinners, their awards, and their self-congratulatory press releases. And while they were busy polishing the Avery legacy, I was quietly, methodically archiving it. I saved the emails where my concerns were dismissed. I tracked the wire transfers. I noted the discrepancies in their public filings versus their internal reports, which I still had access to via a forgotten administrative portal my father had set up for me years ago. I bought time with my silence. My silence was not weakness. It was not acceptance. It was the necessary quiet of an auditor entering a room. You don't announce your presence. You just sit, and you watch, and you wait for the subjects to get comfortable. You wait for them to get sloppy. And tonight, at 11:03 p.m., with a single, arrogant text message and a mistakenly sent photograph, they finally got sloppy. They confused my silence with irrelevance. They thought they were signing a declaration of their victory. They were really signing my intake form. I looked at the 6 words from my mother on the locked screen of my phone. 11:03 p.m. It's over between us. Don't contact me again. I did not read it as a daughter. I read it as a risk analyst. It was a formal notification of severance, a termination notice. It was, in its own way, a contract. And like any contract, its enforceability depended on the evidence. My fingers moved with the practiced, detached efficiency of my profession. Screenshot, crop, export as a PDF document. I airdropped the file to my secure workstation, the one air-gapped from the main Northvale network. I named the file Mavery Comms 2303A PDF. This was not an act of sentiment. It was an act of preservation. I opened my cryptographic toolkit. I applied my personal digital signature, an unforgeable key that is admissible in any federal court. Then, I ran the signed PDF through a SCA-256 algorithm, a hash, a unique 64-character alphanumeric string, a digital fingerprint, A3B8, 9F21. This string was now the file's absolute mathematical identity. I logged the hash in my personal evidence ledger, time-stamped 230411 East. If my mother ever claimed she sent that text in a moment of passion, that she didn't mean it, or that it was fabricated, I had mathematical proof to the contrary. The evidence was now immutable. The next step? The threat was logged. Now, to analyze the attack vector. My workstation at Northvale Systems is a nexus of global data streams, monitoring SEC filings, international wire movements, and regulatory changes in real time. But to find the truth in my hometown, I needed something far less sophisticated. I opened a sandboxed browser instance, routed through 3 anonymous proxies. I navigated to the Norchester Secretary of State Division of Corporations public portal. It's a clunky, gray and blue interface, slow and underfunded, but it is the repository of legal truth for the entire state. In the business entity search field, I bypassed Alder & Co. Foods. That was the past. I typed in the name from the zoomed-in photograph. Alder Trust. The system churned. A single result appeared. My God. They were fast. They were also sloppy. The filing was an electronic submission. Time-stamped. 10:47 p.m. Estás. Tonight, they had filed the irrevocable transfer during their celebratory dinner. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it. They couldn't even wait until morning. I clicked the link. The PDF of the registration document loaded. Sponsor/grantor. My mother. Trustees. My mother. And I had to read this twice. Elias Vance, the Chief Financial Officer of Alder & Co. Foods. Primary beneficiary, Dylan Avery. This was bad. Appointing the company CFO as a trustee for a private family trust that holds company assets is a conflict of interest so vast it borders on parody. Elias was now legally bound to act in the best interest of Dylan, and in the best interest of the company. Those two things were about to become mutually exclusive. I scrolled through the articles of the trust. Article 3. Section 2. Distribution of principal and income. It was dense legalese, but I speak the language, and there it was. A complex, multi-page spendthrift provision. A spendthrift clause is a standard tool. It's designed to protect a beneficiary's inheritance from their own bad judgment, or from creditors. It walls off the money, but this one was different. It had been customized. An addendum. Section 2.4c referenced me by name. For the avoidance of doubt, the grantor's daughter, Sloane Avery, shall not be considered an issue, descendant, or beneficiary for any purpose under this instrument, and is hereby explicitly and permanently excluded from any and all current or future distributions, residual claims, or benefits, material or immaterial, deriving from this trust. They didn't just disinherit me, they legally defined me as a non-person, a stranger to the bloodline. The text message wasn't the weapon, it was the courtesy notification that the weapon had been fired. Who builds a weapon like this? I scrolled to the final page. the signature block. The document wasn't prepared by our longtime family lawyer, a man who still sent me birthday cards. It was executed by a third-party advisory firm. Grayford Fiduciary Services. The name prickled at the back of my neck. It was familiar. I toggled from the state portal to my own professional database, a private, subscription-only library of SEC enforcement actions, FINRA sanctions, and state attorney general settlements. I typed Grayford into the search field. The screen populated instantly, a $1.2 million fine from the state of Delaware, 2023. A cease and desist from the New York AG's office, 2022. The violation: structuring complex trust instruments and offshore entities designed to circumvent statutory disclosure obligations and deliberately obfuscate beneficial ownership. They hadn't just hired lawyers, they had hired specialists in making things disappear. My mother, who couldn't balance her own checkbook, had found the sharks. This changed the calculus. My father's company, Alder & Company, was a simple bricks-and-mortar operation. He bought goods, he sold goods, but a structure built by Grayford would be a labyrinth. I went back to the Norchester portal. I pulled the corporate registration for Alder & Company Foods. I began to cross-reference directors, registered agents, and filing addresses against Grayford's known associates from the enforcement actions. It took me less than 20 minutes. A web began to form on my secondary monitor. 4 new entities, all registered in the last 6 months, all using the same registered agent service in Delaware that Grayford favored. Silver Dunes LLC, Oakline Holdings, Hearthmere Grantor LLC, North Haven Realty. They sounded like idyllic retirement communities or suburban housing developments. They weren't. They were boxes, shells, legal entities created for the sole purpose of holding assets, moving money, and obscuring the source. I started pulling the threads. North Haven Realty, registered 2 months ago, now held the deed to the Alder & Company headquarters and its primary warehouse. My mother had quit-claimed the properties, company assets, to this new shell. Likely for a token $10, removing them from the company's balance sheet. Hearthmere Grantor LLC was listed as the secured party on a new UCC lien against Alder & Company's inventory. They had, in effect, loaned the company its own money back, creating a synthetic debt. And Oakline Holdings, that was the nerve center. How did Grayford get paid for this elaborate work? How were these shells funded? My mother doesn't have that kind of personal liquidity. The answer had to be in the place they thought I no longer looked. I logged into the old Alder & Co. administrative portal. My father had set me up with executive-level access when I was in college, and in their sloppy house cleaning, they had never revoked it. I navigated to the general ledger. I ran a search for Grayford. Nothing. Of course not. They were too smart for that. I ran a search for Silver Dunes. Nothing. Hearthmere. Nothing. I ran a search for Oakline Holdings. Bingo. A wire transfer. Executed 5 business days ago. Amount: $209,000. The memo line contained 2 words. The laziest and most common disguise in corporate fraud. Risk remediation. I've seen this memo line used to hide bribes in Kazakhstan, kickbacks in Brazil, and here, in Westvale, the legal fees for stealing a company. They used company money. They used my father's money to pay the lawyers to write the documents that stole my father's legacy and disinherited me. The dinner receipt from the new Alder Club, paid with the corporate card, wasn't just an insult. It was the final, confirming data point of a systemic pattern. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. My hands were steady. The emotional shock had flatlined, replaced by the cold, clean adrenaline of the audit. They had made a fatal mistake. They had confused a private family matter with a corporate action, and they had just invited a regulator to the table. I went back to my private, encrypted case management system. The file event. Alder transfer was no longer accurate. This was bigger. This was an active investigation. I renamed the file Project Thistle. Thistles are weeds. They have invasive, deep roots. They choke out the good plants. They are covered in spikes. and they are notoriously, painfully difficult to remove. I opened the executive summary field, the text box where I define the investigation's charter. I typed one sentence, my new rule of engagement. Rule 1. If they use the company to oppress, we use the company to illuminate. It was now 1:15 a.m. My mind was sharp. I couldn't move on this as Sloane Avery, the disinherited daughter. They had legally and textually neutered her. I had to move as Sloane Avery, head of ethics and risk at Northvale Systems. Grayford Fiduciary was now a problem for my employer. Northvale Systems, through our multi-billion-dollar pension fund, has passive investments in several private equity funds that are key lenders to specialty food distributors. Alder & Company's creditworthiness, its stability, was now in serious question. If they were playing these games, their covenants were at risk. Furthermore, if Grayford was structuring fraudulent transfers and laundering corporate assets for one family office, they were doing it for others. They were a systemic risk in the fiduciary space. They were a vendor that needed to be reviewed. That made them my business. I opened my corporate calendar. I booked a 20-minute meeting slot for 07:40 a.m. Invitee: Amara Singh, General Counsel, Northvale Systems. Subject: Urgent. Third-party vendor risk. Grayford Fiduciary. The 07:40 slot, just before the senior staff call, would signal the highest level of urgency. It was a quiet meeting, the kind where decisions that shape policy are made before the rest of the building even has its coffee. I did not include my evidence set in the invitation. I would bring the receipts myself, printed and bound. I powered down my secondary monitors. The office was silent again. The city lights below just a static-filled pattern. My mother's text message sat on my phone, unanswered. She wanted me to be silent. She wanted me to disappear. I would be silent, but I was not disappearing. I was escalating. The adrenaline from the legal escalation, sending the 07:40 a.m. meeting invite to our general counsel, hadn't faded. It was 1:30 a.m., and I was in the zone. The investigation was no longer static. It was dynamic. I wasn't just reviewing the past. I was anticipating their future moves. And right on cue, my brother made his... A new notification lit up my personal phone. Dylan had just posted on his own Instagram, tagging the new Alder Club. He was resharing my aunt's photo, the one of him signing the documents, but this time with his own caption. It was a masterpiece of manufactured sentiment. So incredibly humbled and grateful tonight, to my amazing mother, for her strength, and to my father, for the legacy he built. I promise to protect it. The future of Alder & Co. is bright. He added a grateful son hashtag. Humbled, grateful, protect, the language of a man who has just successfully executed a heist. The post was a performance for the public, an attempt to frame the narrative. It was also a mistake. It was fresh evidence, a public declaration of his new role, time-stamped and voluntary. I archived it. Evidence A6, social media Dylan, 2330.png. But it got me thinking. Dylan's clean hands were now publicly attached to the document. He was the grateful son. Let's look at the son's gratitude. How has he been expressing it before tonight? My mother had insulated him, giving him a no-show job in business development with an executive-level corporate Amex. I still had the master login for the corporate card portal. I pulled the detailed, itemized statements for the last 90 days. This wasn't just about the celebratory dinner. This was about a pattern, and the pattern was blatant. $14,000. Gullhaven Yacht Rentals. Memo. Client Entertainment, $20,500. Norcrest Watchworks, a vintage timepiece. Memo. Corporate Gifting, $8,000. A series of charges at a Westvale steakhouse, always a table for two, always on a Tuesday night. I cross-referenced the dates. The yacht rental was the same weekend my mother had pushed for an emergency 10% cut in employee healthcare benefits, citing unforeseen market headwinds. The watch was purchased the day after a round of layoffs in the bakery division. He wasn't just a beneficiary, he was an active participant. He was bleeding the company dry, using the corporate account as his personal slush fund, and Elias Vance, the CFO, was approving every expense. Dylan's clean hands were filthy. But this was small. This was theft. But it was petty, greedy theft. It was the symptom, not the disease. The disease was the $209,000 wire transfer, the one memoed risk remediation. I went back into the Alder & Cote accounts payable system. I found the transaction, wire 901B, paid to Oakline Holdings, approved by E. Vance. But a wire doesn't just happen. There has to be an invoice. An invoice is the instruction, the why. I found the scanned attachment. Invoice OK001. My screen refreshed, and I just stared. It was the laziest piece of fraud I had ever seen in my professional career. It was a generic Microsoft Word template. The address for Oakline Holdings was a UPS store in Wilmington, Delaware, a mail drop. There was no phone number, no list of services, no breakdown of hours, just a single line item. For consulting services rendered, $209,000 hours. No deliverables, no project scope, no dates, nothing. It was a blank piece of paper asking for $250,000. This wasn't risk remediation. This was a transparent, audacious fabrication. This was the kind of invoice a first-year auditor would flag in their sleep. It was an insult to my intelligence. It was the physical proof of the money laundering pipeline. Money went from Alder & Co. as a consulting fee to Oakline Holdings, the shell company. Oakline Holdings then, presumably, funded the Alder Trust. And who benefited? Dylan. And who sat at the center of it all, connecting the two, signing the checks and managing the trust? Elias Vance, the CFO. He had violated his fiduciary duty in every possible direction. He had authorized a fraudulent payment from the company he was sworn to protect, to a shell company, in order to fund a private trust that he himself was a trustee of. It was a perfect, closed loop of criminal self-dealing. This changed everything. My meeting at 07:40 a.m. was no longer just about a third-party vendor risk. It was about an active, provable conspiracy. I had to stop them from shredding. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This couldn't come from Sloan Avery, the daughter. It had to come from Sloan Avery, head of ethics and risk. It had to carry the weight of Northvale Systems. I opened my corporate email. 2. Mother's corporate email. Elias. Vance at alderandco.com, CC. Amara. Singh at northvalesys.com, my general counsel. Subject. Official preservation notice. Pending investigation and potential litigation. The subject line alone would stop their hearts. It was a legal broadside. This notice is to inform you that Alder & Cote Foods, its directors, officers, and trustees, including but not limited to Mother's name and Elias Vance, are parties to a pending investigation concerning potential breaches of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of corporate assets, and fraudulent transfers. Effective immediately, you are legally required to preserve all documents and data, in all forms, related to this matter. This includes, but is not limited to, all communications, email, text, messaging apps, related to Alder Trust, Oakline Holdings, Silver Dunes LLC, Hearthmere Grantor LLC, and North Haven Realty. All financial records, drafts, and invoices related to the formation and funding of said entities. All server logs, access logs, and electronic data, including data marked for deletion. Destruction, alteration, or concealment of any such data, spoliation, will subject you to severe legal and financial penalties. A full list of discovery demands will follow. Govern yourselves accordingly. I attached my digital signature block. Sloan Avery, Head of Ethics and Risk, Northvale Systems. I hit send. The sound of the email leaving my outbox was as loud as a gunshot in the silent office. It was 3:00 a.m. The first shot had been fired. They would wake up in a few hours, nursing their champagne hangovers, and find a legal bomb in their inboxes. they would panic. I leaned back, my heart hammering. The litigation hold was a shield. It would force them to pause. Now, for the sword. I went back to the first piece of evidence, the photo my aunt sent, IMG 8992.jpg. I had saved the original file, not a screenshot. It was sent as an attachment in the group chat, not as a compressed image, another sloppy mistake. I have a team. My digital forensics unit at Northvale is composed of former intelligence agency analysts. They can pull data from a brick. I opened a secure chat and uploaded the image file to my department's head of forensics. My message? Mark, need a favor. Full metadata extraction on this file. Need to know everything. Original file name, camera data, GPS, any embedded XMP data. It's urgent. Mark was a night owl, like me. 3 minutes later, the reply came. On it. Give me 5. My screen was a web of data points. The trust document, the blank invoice, the corporate card statements, the social media posts, and now, I waited for the keystone. The chat window flashed. A file dropped into my secure folder. Report as 8992 text. I opened it. Camera. Apple iPhone 15 Pro. Lens. 24mm f1.78. Timestamp. 22:51:04 EST. 11 minutes before the trust was electronically filed with the state. GPS. 40.7128 again. 74.060 Dagagiu. Pinpointing the exact coordinates of the new Alder Club's private dining room. All good, all confirming. And then, at the bottom of the report, the field I was looking for, XMP, original document name. The file, when it was on the sender's phone, before it was renamed IMGU8992 by the messaging app, had a different name. The name was saved in the metadata. Emergency Amendment B Final, signed. JPG. I read the word 3 times. Emergency. This wasn't the original plan. This was a deviation. Amendment. This was a change to an existing document. This was a last-minute alteration. B. This was, at minimum, the second attempt. My entire perspective shifted. I had been looking at an act of arrogant, triumphant celebration, but the metadata told a different story. This wasn't a celebration, it was a panicked reaction. They weren't just cutting me out. They were racing against a clock. They were trying to fix something. They were afraid of something. Afraid of what? My father. His declining health. Had he done something? Said something? It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were sloppy, and they were scared. I looked at the empty 0740 a.m. meeting slot on my calendar. I was going to need a bigger room. My 0740 a.m. meeting with Amara Singh, Northvale's general counsel, took place in her office, not mine. Her space is on the 50th floor, corner glass, with a view that could see 3 states. It smells like strong tea and old, expensive law books. Amara is a small, sharp woman who wears impeccably tailored suits and speaks with the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who has never, in her entire career, been wrong on a point of law. I didn't sit. I stood at her conference table and laid out the printed evidence in 3 stacks. Stack A, the family exhibits, the photo, the text, the social media posts. Stack B, the corporate fraud, the $209,000 blank invoice, the wire transfer, the new Alder Club receipt paid by the corporate card. Stack C, the metadata, the emergency amendment B, JPG report. Amara looked at Stack A for less than 10 seconds. Family matters, she said, dismissing them. Irrelevant to us. She spent 3 minutes on Stack B. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the blank invoice. Lazy, she murmured. She tapped the Alder Trust document. And Vance as trustee? That's not just lazy. That's structural self-dealing. It compromises every financial statement they've issued since he was appointed. Then I gave her Stack C. She read the metadata report, her expression hardening. Emergency amendment, I said. They were reacting to something, panicked. They used company funds to pay a high-risk firm to execute a fraudulent transfer in a hurry. Amara looked up at me, her gaze analytical, devoid of pity. Your litigation hold was correct. You sent it as an officer of Northvale. I did, I said. Good. It has our weight. This firm, Grayford, they're a contagion. If they're structuring this for Alder & Co., they're doing it for others, some of whom may be our counterparties. They're a systemic risk to our portfolio. She stood. Book your meeting. I'll be there. That was all the authorization I needed. At 9:05 a.m., I sent the invitation from my Northvale Systems email account. 2. Managing Partner at Grayford Fiduciary. Subject: Urgent. Vendor Compliance Review. Northvale Systems Pension Fund. Good morning. Our records indicate your firm, Grayford Fiduciary, has recently been engaged as a service provider for Alder & Company Foods, an entity that is a counterparty to several of our fund's credit interests. Northvale's Ethics and Risk Division is conducting a routine compliance audit of all high-risk third-party vendors associated with our portfolio. We have identified several irregularities in recent filings that require immediate clarification. We have availability at 2 p.m. today at our headquarters. Please confirm your attendance. They were arrogant. They replied in 4 minutes. We will be there. We are happy to clarify our work. They thought they were coming to placate a sleepy pension fund analyst. At 1:58 p.m., I was waiting in conference room 28B. The rooms at the new Alder Club are designed to look old. Dark wood, heavy curtains, soft light. They are built to absorb sound, to conceal. The conference rooms at Northvale Systems are the opposite. They are boxes of glass, suspended over the city. There is no wood, only brushed steel. The light is a cold, clinical white. There is nowhere to hide. Amara Singh was already seated at the far end of the table. Not at the head. She was positioned as an observer, a legal stenographer. She had a yellow legal pad and a single pen. Her very presence in the room was a weapon. At 2:03 p.m., 2 men from Grayford Fiduciary arrived. Not the managing partner. They sent associates. A young, slick one in a suit that was too tight, and an older, paler one who looked like their in-house counsel. They looked confident. They were smiling. Sloane Avery? The slick one said, extending a hand. I did not take it. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the 2 chairs in the middle of the table. Directly under the brightest light, I remained standing at the head of the table, in front of the 80-inch 4K screen. Thank you for coming, I said. My voice was the one I use for quarterly risk reviews, flat, sterile, authoritative. This is Amara Singh, our general counsel. She is here to observe, as I noted. This is a compliance review. We have questions about a recent transaction that touches our interests. The slick one nodded, his smile fixed. Of course, we value transparency. How can we help? You can start by explaining this. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. It was not a PowerPoint slide. It was a live diagram from my case management software. In the center, a box labeled Alder & Co. Foods. Branching from it, 4 smaller boxes: Silver Dunes, LLC, Oakline Holdings, Hearthmere Grantor, LLC, North Haven Realty, a bright red arrow, thick as a finger, moved from Alder & Co. to Oakline Holdings. A label appeared over the arrow. Wire. $209,000. The color drained from the older lawyer's face. The younger one's smile twitched. That, I said, is a wire transfer from Alder & Co.'s operating account to a shell entity, Oakline Holdings. The memo line was risk remediation. I clicked again. The scanned image of the blank, single-line invoice filled the screen. This was the only supporting documentation. As a fiduciary yourself, what risk do you believe a $209,000 blank invoice remediates? The older lawyer leaned forward. Ms. Avery, I'm afraid you're operating at a disadvantage. Our engagement with our client is confidential. We are not at liberty to discuss the specifics of our work. I'm not asking about your work. I'm asking about this payment. It was made from a corporate account. Did you, as counsel, advise your client, my mother, that it was appropriate to use corporate funds for this purpose? The slick one scoffed. We advised our client, we have no relationship with you. You do now, Amara Singh said from the end of the table. She didn't look up from her pad. The room temperature dropped 5 degrees. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. It now showed 2 documents side by side. On the left, the registration for the Alder Trust, showing Elias Vance, CFO of Alder & Kone, as a trustee. On the right, the $209,000 wire transfer, approved by that same Elias Vance. You are a fiduciary service, I said to the lawyers. You are experts in governance. Does this arrangement seem appropriate to you? A CFO approving a massive undocumented payment from his company to a shell, which then funds a trust that he personally administers. Did you structure this? Silence. The slick one was no longer smiling. The older one was staring at his hands. Let's make this simple, I said. I'll ask a direct question. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the cold steel table. Who paid the legal fees for the creation of the Alder Trust? Was it my mother's name, from her personal funds, or was it Alder & Co. Foods, the corporation? The older lawyer held his ground. We cannot disclose client billing. You can't? I said. Because I can. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to Article 4, Section 8 of the Alder & Co. Corporate Charter. I had pulled it from the state registry that morning. I highlighted the text. Prohibition on commingling of assets, the use of corporate funds, assets, or credit for the personal benefit, legal or otherwise, of any director, officer, or non-corporate beneficiary is strictly prohibited. You helped your client, the honorary chair, and your other client, the CFO, violate their own corporate charter. I said, a charter that is a public document. This is not just a breach of fiduciary duty. It is gross negligence on your part. You didn't even do basic due diligence. The slick younger lawyer finally broke. He looked panicked. He was trying to defend his work, his firm. Look, we just papered the transaction. It was a rush job. Your mother, the client. She insisted on the timing. She said it had to be done before the quarterly filing. I paused. I let his words hang in the sterile, silent air. I looked at Amara. She was writing. She had gotten the admission. I turned back to him. Thank you, I said. My voice was quiet. The timing. I clicked the remote, and the screen went black. The ambush was over. The 2 men looked stunned, as if they'd been in a car crash. They had walked in to swat a fly and found themselves in a bear trap. This meeting is over, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. My office, on behalf of the Northvale Systems Pension Fund, finds that Grayford Fiduciary Services is operating in a manner inconsistent with its obligations. You have actively facilitated corporate fraud. We will be sending a full report of these findings to your firm's audit committee and your state's bar association. You should expect a subpoena for the full, unredacted file. The older lawyer stood up, his face ashen. He walked out without a word. The younger one scrambled after him, grabbing his briefcase, his face a mask of dawning professional horror. The door clicked shut. Amara Singh stood, gathered her pad and pen, and walked to my side. She paused. Good work, Avery, she said. The quarterly filing comment was the kill shot. That's conspiracy to commit securities fraud. She left. I stood alone in the glass room for a moment, the city sprawling out beneath me. I felt nothing, no triumph, just completion, a task checked off a list. I walked back to my desk. My office was quiet, just the low hum of the servers. My personal phone, which I'd left on my desk, was lit up. It was vibrating, buzzing across the black composite surface like an injured insect. Dylan Avery, 15. Missed calls. Dylan Avery. New voicemail. 3. Mother's name. New message. 4. They had, as expected, received my litigation hold notice. They had, as expected, called Grayford, and Grayford had, as expected, told them what just happened. The panic I'd predicted last night was now in full swing. I watched the phone vibrate again with an incoming call from my brother. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I pressed the Do Not Disturb button. I turned back to my monitor, pulled up the draft of my report to Grayford's audit committee, and began to write. My phone was a block of vibrating black plastic on my desk, convulsing with the silent, insistent panic of my brother. 15 missed calls. He was, I suspected, in an office with my mother and Elias Vance, finally understanding the legal implications of the litigation hold I had sent from my Northvale account. They were trapped. Their private corporate fraud was now the official business of a Fortune-listed entity. My work there, for the day, was done. But my own work was not. I didn't go home. I drove, not to my sterile apartment, but to a vault, a branch of a quiet, old-money bank in the city, the kind with thick carpets and managers who still wear vests. I went to my safe deposit box. The box was cold. Inside, beneath my passport and a few bonds, was a single 9x12 manila envelope. It was thick, rigid, and sealed on the back not with glue, but with a heavy, dull red wax seal, impressed with the logo of a law firm I hadn't spoken to in years, Jacoby & Marsh. On the front, in Arthur Jacoby's precise, fountain pen script, was one instruction, for Sloane Avery, to be opened only in the event you are materially excluded from the family estate. My mother's text, "It's over between us," was a clear statement of intent, the Alder Trust document, which legally defined me as a non-person, was the execution, the trigger. I assessed, had been met. I took the envelope back to my apartment, in the clean white light of my kitchen. I slid it open with a knife, breaking the seal. There was no emotional, winding letter. My father was not a sentimental man. Inside were two things. The first was a legal document. First codicil to the last will and testament of father's name. It was dated just under 2 years ago. It was from the time after his diagnosis, but before the fog had truly set in. His signature at the bottom was recognizably his, a little thinner. The loops not as bold, but undeniably his. It was notarized. It was binding. I read the text. It didn't revoke his previous will, the one that I assumed had been superseded by my mother's actions. It amended it. It was a fail-safe. I read the operative clause, Article 4, and my breath stopped. This codicil shall be triggered and its provisions enacted immediately upon the event that any beneficiary, including the grantor's spouse, engages in a willful act of public disparagement or the material exclusion of any of the grantor's children from the affairs or assets of the estate. If triggered, the codicil didn't just rebalance the scales, it vaporized the old structure. It dictated that all assets, including all shares of Alder & Cody Foods, were to bypass any individual beneficiary and flow directly into a new, independent entity, the Greystone Equitable Trust. The terms of this new trust were simple: to be administered by an independent, court-appointed trustee, the net income and principal to be distributed in 3 equal, indivisible shares, to my mother, my brother, and me. My mother's legacy dinner wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was the legal key. My mind, trained in pattern recognition, snapped the evidence into place. Trigger Condition 1. Public disparagement. Evidence A3 Direct Text Mother, 2303. PDF. It's over between us. A direct, written severing of the relationship. Trigger Condition 2. Material exclusion from the affairs or assets. Evidence A1 and Group Message 2302. JPG. The photo of the irrevocable transfer instrument. Evidence A5. Analysis Zoom. Irrevocable PNG. The Alder Trust itself, which explicitly names me as excluded. Evidence A2. Social media Ant 2303. PNG. Finally, the family name is safe, a public declaration of my exclusion. They had, with their own hands, in their own arrogant celebration, perfectly and completely fulfilled the trigger clause. By trying to take everything, my mother and brother had legally ensured they would get only 1/3, and that they would lose all control. Then I saw the second item in the envelope. It was a small, yellow post-it note, paper-clipped to the top of the codicil. It was my father's blocky, all-caps handwriting, a message from the past, from the man who knew what his wife was capable of, from the man who saw my rigidity not as a flaw, but as a solution. It contained 7 words. Sloan knows the numbers. Trust the numbers. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the company. It was this. It was a validation of my entire life. It was a directive, a final order from my CEO. My hands were not shaking. I was perfectly calm. The grief, the rage, the humiliation from the night before, it all coalesced and hardened into a single, cold point of action. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Dylan back. I dialed Arthur Jacoby, the lawyer. He was semi-retired, but I knew he kept a line for special clients. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Jacoby?" I said, my voice as flat and steady as it was in the 2:00 p.m. meeting. "This is Sloan Avery. I have just opened the envelope." There was a long silence on the line, then a low sigh. "Sloan, I was hoping you would never have to. I am so sorry." "There's no time for that," I said. "The trigger condition has been met, completely. I am sending you a secure file. It contains a cryptographically hashed evidence chain. I need an emergency petition filed with the Greystone County Probate Court. I need an immediate injunction." "An injunction on what?" Arthur asked. "On the Alder Trust. They filed it last night. They transferred all assets. I need it frozen, pending the probate of this codicil. And I need the bank that acts as custodian for the Alder & Co. shares to be served. Today." "Sloan," he said, his voice now sharp, "all business." "That's an extraordinary remedy. A judge won't sign that without—" "He will," I interrupted. "The evidence is mathematical. It includes my mother's written severance, the public social media posts of the exclusion, and the trust document itself. It's a clean file. Just file the petition." "Send it," he said. I hung up. I sat at my home workstation, a mirror of my office setup. I drafted a new email, attached my evidence ledger, and sent it to his private email. Subject: Petition to enact codicil. Evidence chain. For 36 minutes, the world stopped. There were no calls, no texts, just the low hum of my server. I was in the space between action and consequence. At 5:01 p.m., my inbox pinged. From Arthur Jacoby, Esca. Subject: Signed, in re-estate of father's name. Case No. GCPR 25881. I opened the attachment. It was a scanned PDF, still warm from the courthouse e-filing system. A Greystone County probate judge had signed the order. "It is hereby ordered, 1. That all assets pertaining to the Alder Trust, dated October 23, 2025, are temporarily enjoined and frozen. 2. That all authority of the named trustees, mother's name, and Elias Vance, is hereby suspended. 3. That custodian bank is ordered to place an immediate hold on all assets, shares, and accounts related to Alder & Co. Foods, pending a full evidentiary hearing. From my filing to the judge's signature, 36 minutes. The system," I noted, "works remarkably fast when you provide clean data." A second email came from Arthur. "It's done. The bank has been served electronically. Nothing is moving. The trust is frozen. They are powerless." I closed the PDF. I felt the tension in my shoulders release, not in relief, but in completion. Phase 2 was done. Then I remembered. I opened my Alder & Co. corporate email, the one I hadn't checked in a week. An invitation, sent 3 days ago by Elias Vance. Subject: Special all-hands meeting and shareholder update. When? Tomorrow, October 25th, 10:03 a.m. Where? Alder & Co. Headquarters atrium. Memo. Please join us as we celebrate a new chapter for Alder and Coy and the Avery legacy. This was it. This was the celebration they had planned, the one where my mother and Dylan would stand before the employees, triumphant, having secured the company, the one where they would announce the bright future my brother had posted about. I looked at the judge's order on my screen. I looked at the meeting invitation. They had called a meeting to celebrate their victory. They had just forgotten to check the results. My fingers moved to the keyboard. I hit Reply All. To Elias Vance, CC, mother's name, Dylan Avery, all employees distribution list. Elias. Thank you for the invitation. I will be there. Please add one item to the agenda for the 10:00 a.m. meeting. A review of the emergency court order freezing the Alder Trust. See attached. Regards, Sloan Avery, shareholder. I attached the judge's signed order. I hit send. The atrium at Alder & Company headquarters was designed to impress. It was a 3-story cavern of glass and white-painted steel, flooded with morning light. A massive, stylized A was carved into the travertine marble floor. My father had built it to signify transparency. My mother was using it as a stage. It was packed. Hundreds of employees from the front office, the bakeries, and the warehouses stood on the main floor and lined the glass balconies above. They had been promised a celebration, a generational transfer. At a table near the front, I saw them, the local press, a reporter and a photographer from the Westvale Gazette, invited by my mother to document her triumph, to print the picture of Dylan, the grateful son. At 10:02 a.m., Elias Vance, his face a pale, sweaty mask, walked to the podium. He looked like a man being forced to read his own eulogy. My Reply All email, containing the judge's order, had landed 16 hours ago. Every employee in this room had seen it. The air in the atrium wasn't celebratory. It was thick with a tense, electric curiosity. "Welcome," Elias stammered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Thank you for joining us. We are here to celebrate the future of Alder & Co." He was visibly shaking. He couldn't even make eye contact with the crowd. He spoke for less than 30 seconds before introducing my mother. My mother, however, was a performer. She ascended the small stage, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored suit, her face a mask of calm, regal authority. She was ignoring the email, ignoring the court order. She was going to will her narrative into reality. She gripped the podium. "Thank you, Elias. What a wonderful day." She beamed at the crowd, then at Dylan, who sat in the front row. "At Alder & Co., we have always known one thing, one truth that guides us. Family is at our core. It is our foundation. It is our legacy." She was going to give the whole speech, the one about passing the torch. I didn't let her. I walked out from the side aisle and straight toward the stage. I was wearing my Northvale armor, a severe charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back so tightly it hurt. I wasn't an employee. I wasn't a guest. I was an auditor. I stepped onto the stage. My mother's eyes widened, a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred passing over her features before she recomposed her smile. "Sloan, darling," she said into the mic, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you to join the celebration." "I'm not here for the celebration," I said, my voice quiet. I turned to Elias Vance, who was still standing near the AV cart. "Elias, you called this a shareholder update. I'm a shareholder. I have a few notes on compliance. I'll need the projector. It will only take 2 minutes." He looked at my mother, who gave a tiny, imperceptible shake of her head. He was trapped between her and the legal reality I had emailed to his entire company. I didn't wait for his permission. I walked to the cart, took the HDMI cable, and plugged it into my laptop. I was holding a small, silver USB remote. The giant screen behind my mother, which had been displaying a cheerful Alder & Co. A New Generation logo, flickered and changed. My first slide appeared. It was the entity map from Project Thistle. "Good morning, everyone," I said. My voice, amplified by the PA system, was cold and clear. It cut through the atrium. What you are looking at is a flow of funds analysis. 2 nights ago, $209,000 was wired from Alder & Co.'s operating account. I used the laser pointer in the remote. The red dot landed on the box labeled Alder & Co. To a brand new shell company, Oakline Holdings. The red dot moved. The memo for this wire was risk remediation. I pulled the invoice. I clicked the remote. Slide 2. The blank invoice, OK001, filled the screen. This is the invoice for that $209,000. As you can see, there are no deliverables, no services listed. It is a blank piece of paper. This money, your money, the company's money, was not used for risk remediation. I clicked again. Slide 3. A split screen. On the left, the wire transfer approval, signed by E. Vance, CFO. On the right, the Alder Trust registration, listing E. Vance, trustee. The money was used to fund a private family trust, a trust whose trustee is the same man who approved the wire transfer. This is a textbook definition of corporate fraud. It is an illicit, arm's-length transaction, and it is a gross violation of fiduciary duty. A collective gasp went up from the balconies. The employees weren't just curious anymore. They were angry. The Westvale Gazette reporter was writing so fast his pen was blurring. Dylan leaped from his chair. He lunged toward the stage, his face purple with rage. "She's lying. This is insane. You're sabotaging us. This is private family business." I turned to him. I didn't raise my voice. "You're right, Dylan," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. It was a private family matter. I clicked the remote. Slide 4. The screen went black, and then, in simple, white text, the words appeared. "It's over between us. Don't contact me again." The atrium was dead quiet. "This," I said, "is a text message I received from my mother at 11:03 p.m. 2 nights ago, sent just after she and Dylan signed the documents to disinherit me. It was sent after a legacy dinner I was not invited to. A dinner, I might add, that was illegally paid for with the corporate credit card." I let the words hang. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the reporter. My father's will contains a codicil, a failsafe. It states that all assets must be split equally if, and I quote, "any beneficiary engages in a willful act of public disparagement or the material exclusion of any child from the affairs of the estate." I turned back to my mother, who was clutching the podium, her knuckles white. I said the words slowly, separately, like driving nails. Public, disparagement, material, exclusion. I clicked the remote. The slide changed to the image of my aunt's Instagram post. Finally, the family name is safe. Activated. You, Dylan was sputtering, pointing at me. "You can't do this." "I didn't," I said. "The Greystone County Probate Court did. Yesterday." I clicked the remote. Slide 5. The judge's order, the official court seal in the corner. I highlighted the case number, GCPR 25881, and the key phrases, "It is hereby ordered. All assets pertaining to the Alder Trust are temporarily enjoined and frozen. All authority of the named trustees, mother's name, and Elias Vance, is hereby suspended." The murmuring in the crowd exploded. It was a roar. People were standing, pointing. Employees who had worked there for 30 years, who knew my father, were looking at my mother with open contempt. Elias Vance was backing away, toward the exit, as if he could simply walk away from a federal crime. "Mr. Vance, stay where you are," I commanded. "This meeting is a shareholder update, and you are still the CFO. In fact, perhaps you can clarify this for your employees." I clicked again. Slide 6. Article 4. Section 8 of the Alder & Co. Corporate Charter. The rule they broke. I turned to the company's in-house general counsel, a man who had been hiding in the front row. "Mr. Harrison, you are the company's counsel. Would you please read the highlighted section for the shareholders?" He stood, his voice shaking. He read the words from the screen. The use of corporate funds, assets, or credit for the personal benefit, legal or otherwise, of any director, officer, or non-corporate beneficiary is strictly prohibited. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I said. I turned back to the crowd, back to the employees. They used this company as their private bank to fund a family lawsuit. They used your profits, the money that pays your salaries, to steal my inheritance, and they were sloppy enough to do it all on the company's books. My mother finally broke. Her performance of calm shattered. She lunged for the microphone, her face a mask of primal fury. "Sloan!" she shrieked, her voice cracking over the PA. "I am your mother!" The entire atrium flinched. The last shred of her dignity was gone. I didn't flinch. I stood half a foot away from her and spoke, my own voice deadly calm, directly into the same microphone. "And I am your daughter. A daughter is not an expense line you can just write off." The Westvale Gazette camera flashed, capturing the image. The two of us, face to face, the court order projected on the screen behind us. I stepped back. I looked past my mother, past Dylan, to the stunned faces of the employees. "This celebration is over. The company is not yours," I said, looking at my mother. "It's not yours," I said, looking at Dylan. "As of 5:01 p.m. yesterday, it is under the control of the court, pending a full evidentiary hearing on fraud." I unplugged my laptop. The screen behind me went black. I stepped off the stage, my heels clicking on the marble, and walked down the center aisle, right through the middle of the crowd. I didn't look back. I could feel the heat of 100 pairs of eyes on my back and the silent, burning gaze of my mother. I just kept walking. I had not left the building. I had walked off the stage, my heels clicking on the travertine, and stopped in the darkness at the back of the atrium, just behind the press table. I stood there, a silent observer, as the scene I had detonated imploded. My mother's shriek, "I am your mother," was still echoing, a raw, ugly sound that hung in the air. The employees on the balconies were all standing, filming with their phones. Dylan was on the stage, his face a blotchy red, screaming, "Security! Get her out!" But the two security guards, who had worked there for 20 years, were staring at the court order on the screen, motionless. The reporter from the Gazette was on his feet, holding his phone up to me, asking, Ms. Avery, what happens now?" Elias Vance was trying to make a break for the side exit, but was blocked by a line of warehouse workers. My mother, seeing her power evaporate, pointed a trembling finger at me. You have no right. You are nothing. You are not a shareholder. The trust has everything." The chaos was the perfect cover for the second act. My mother thought this was over. She thought I had fired my only shot. She thought this was about my father's will. She was wrong. This was a shareholder meeting. I walked from the shadows of the back wall to the small Q&A microphone on a stand in the center aisle. I clicked it on. A sharp chirp of feedback cut through the noise, silencing the room. "This meeting is not adjourned," I announced. My voice, amplified, was flat. "Mr. Vance, please return to the stage. This is a shareholder update, and we have one final item of business." "You're not a shareholder. Sloan," Dylan bellowed from the stage. "You heard her. You were excluded. The trust owns the shares." "The trust is frozen, Dylan," I said, my voice cutting through his. "Its assets are paralyzed by court order, but that's irrelevant. You're right. I'm not here today as my father's daughter." I began to walk slowly back down the aisle, this time toward the stage. I am here as the company's single largest creditor. You could hear a pin drop. Elias Vance, who had been trying to escape, froze. He turned, his face the color of ash. He knew what was coming. 2 years ago, I said, my voice resonating through the atrium, Alder & Co. was facing a severe cash flow crisis. The books were a mess. The banks had refused a bridge loan. My father was ill. The company was 48 hours from failing to make payroll. I saw employees in the crowd nodding. They remembered. They remembered the rumors, the fear. Elias Vance, I said, pointing at him, flew to my office at Northvale. In secret, he begged for a $1.5 million emergency loan. He couldn't go to my mother because it would have exposed his mismanagement. He came to me. I reached the steps of the stage. My mother looked at me, her expression one of pure, blank confusion. This was a narrative she didn't control. I provided the capital, I said, but I am the head of ethics and risk. I am not sentimental. I did not provide a personal loan. I made a strategic investment. I purchased a convertible bond. The confusion on my mother's face was joined by the dawning horror on Dylan's. Elias just looked sick. A convertible bond, I explained to the room, to the press. It is debt, but it comes with a contract that states the debt can be exchanged for stock, for equity, if certain conditions are met. I was on the stage now, standing 3 feet from Elias. Mr. Vance was so desperate to save himself that day. He signed it without, I suspect, reading the covenants. He took the money, he made payroll, and he buried the bond in the company's long-term debt ledger. He probably forgot. I looked at him. I didn't. I raised my voice again, projecting to the balconies. That bond contained a clause, a standard, boilerplate, change of control provision. It specified that if the effective control of Alder & Cody Foods, the majority of its assets or its voting shares, was transferred, assigned, or placed into a trust without the express written consent of the bondholder, I, the bondholder, had the right to immediately convert the full value of the bond into common stock, at a preset, contractually locked price. I let the words land. I turned and looked at my mother and brother. 2 nights ago, at the New Alder Club, when you signed the irrevocable transfer instrument and created the Alder Trust to disinherit me, you didn't just trigger my father's will, you triggered my contract. I reached into my briefcase, which I had set down earlier, and pulled out a fresh, crisp document. This, I announced, holding it high for the press camera to see, is my formal notice of conversion. As of 10:14 a.m., I am exercising my right. I am converting the full $1.5 million principal, plus 2 years of accrued interest, into voting shares. How many shares? The reporter from the Gazette shouted. I looked at my paper. According to the price set in the contract, that converts to 18.7% of all voting shares of Alder & Cody Foods, effective immediately. Dylan was on his phone, screaming at, presumably, a lawyer. My mother was just staring at the paper in my hand. She was finally, completely, silent. But 18.7% is not a controlling interest, I said, which is why I am not acting alone. This was the final piece, the one they could never have anticipated. For the last 18 months, I said to the crowd, I have been in quiet communication with other minority shareholders, the distant cousins, the early round investors, the retired executives who, like you, were disgusted by the family's spending, the people who were tired of watching corporate funds buy yachts and vintage watches. I pulled a second file from my briefcase, a thick stack of papers. I hold in my hand their legal, notarized proxies, an additional 12.3% of the company. I held the 2 files up, my 18.7%, their 12.3%, together, as of this moment. I speak for 31% of this company. Dylan threw his phone. It hit the marble floor and shattered. He looked at the family lawyer, who had been standing near the front row. The lawyer, a man who had only seen the probate filing, looked at the bond conversion notice in my hand, looked at the proxies, and then just shook his head. He could fight the will. He couldn't fight a senior secured debt contract. The power in the room had shifted. It was no longer a family spat. It was a corporate takeover. This shareholder update is now a special meeting of the shareholders, I declared. My voice was iron. Elias Vance, you are suspended as CFO, pending a federal investigation into wire fraud. My mother, you are suspended as chair, by court order. I turned to the stunned, silent crowd. I now propose 3 resolutions to the shareholders of Alder & Co. We will vote by a show of hands. I didn't need a slide. I knew them by heart. 1. I move that we hire a Big Four independent auditing firm, not a local friend, to conduct a full, unsparing, forensic audit of the last 3 years of this company's books. 2. I move that this company's new independent board be directed to seek full legal reimbursement from Mother's Name, Dylan Avery, and Elias Vance for all misappropriated funds, including the $209,000 wire transfer, all personal items, and all legal fees related to the formation of the illegal trust. And 3, my voice rose, I move that all corporate salaries, all special privileges, all company cards, and all building access for those 3 individuals be suspended, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the audit and the probate trial. I looked out at the sea of faces, employees, shareholders, my family. All in favor, I commanded. My hand went up first, sharp, straight, then, a man in the 3rd row, a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, raised his, then another, then a woman on the balcony, a bakery manager with a small stock plan, raised hers, and then, like a wave, a forest of hands, the employees, the investors, the people my father had built the company with, they all raised their hands. The Gazette photographer's camera was flashing, flash, 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 capturing the hundreds of hands in the air. All opposed? I asked, looking directly at my mother. She stood motionless, her hand limp at her side. Dylan was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists, but they were not raised, they were defeated. The resolutions pass, I declared. My mother took a half-step back, a small, involuntary stumble. She looked small. She looked, for the first time in her life, irrelevant. I did not move toward her. I did not offer a word of comfort. I did not feel triumph. I felt balanced. The system had worked. I stepped away from the podium. I was not the chair. I was not the CEO. I was just the shareholder who had finally, after 31 years, cleaned the books. I looked at my cousin in the front row. The independent committee has the floor, I said. I'm returning to my seat. I stepped off the stage, my heels clicking, and left them there, in the spotlight, to be held, finally, to account. I did not look back. I just let the system I had set in motion do its work. I did not stay to watch the committee take charge. I had stepped off the stage, my purpose fulfilled, and moved to the far side of the atrium. I stood by the 3-story wall of glass, a silent observer. As the new order asserted itself, the chaos subsided. My cousin, the one I had not seen in a decade, was now at the podium. His voice was calm, firm, and radiated an authority my brother never possessed. He was assuring the employees that their jobs were safe, that payroll was secure, and that an emergency session of the independent shareholders was already underway. The press, including the Westvale Gazette reporter, were being politely but firmly escorted from the building. The employees on the balconies began to disperse, talking in low, urgent tones. The system, having been shattered, was already reforming. My mother and Dylan had been led by the company's pale-faced general counsel into a side conference room, no doubt to explain the concepts of wire fraud and probate court injunctions. Elias Vance was with them, his career visibly over. I had done what I came to do. The audit was in motion. The rest was procedure. My personal phone, silent in my pocket for hours, gave a single, distinct vibration. It was not a call. It was a calendar notification pushed from my lawyer's office. I pulled it out. Entry. Clerk. Greystone Probate Court. Confirms receipt of conversion notice and shareholder vote. All injunctions extended indefinitely. Initial hearing date set. November 18th, 10:02 a.m. Case GCPR 25881. It was a simple, procedural confirmation. The emergency injunction was now a standard. Long-term hold. The wheels of the court, which I had set spinning with a single, hashed evidence file, were now turning with their own massive, inexorable weight. The Alder Trust was not just frozen, it was legally entombed, pending a trial my mother could not possibly win. "Ms. Avery, Sloane!" I looked up. The reporter from the Gazette had broken away from his security escort and was holding the glass exit door open, his notepad in hand. He was young, ambitious, and he knew he was on the biggest story of his career. "Just one question, please," he called out. The remaining people in the atrium turned to listen. "What do you want now? After all this, what do you want? Are you taking over the company?" It was the obvious question, the one my mother, in her paranoia, had always assumed was my secret motive. They thought this was a coup, a palace intrigue. I walked over to him, stopping a few feet from the door. My voice was quiet, no longer needing the atrium's PA system. "No," I said. "I'm not taking over." He frowned. "Then what? What was this all for?" I gave him the only answer I had, the one that had been my thesis from the moment I saw the blank invoice. "Transparency," I said, "and restitution." "That's it?" he asked, incredulous. "After what they did?" "They used corporate funds to commit a crime," I said, my voice as flat and clear as the glass I was standing next to. "I want the money returned to the company. I want the books to be clean. Nothing more." The security guard finally reached him and gently pulled the door shut. The reporter stared at me through the glass as I turned away. My path to the exit was blocked. It was Dylan. He was standing alone in the middle of the vast, empty marble floor. The anger was gone. The bravado had evaporated. He looked exactly like what he was, a child who had been caught. His face was blotchy, his eyes red and swollen. He had clearly been crying. "Sloane," he whispered. His voice was raw. I stopped. I waited. I didn't know," he stammered, the words tumbling out. "About the invoice, the $209,000. I swear. She just told me it was paperwork to protect the legacy, to protect me. She said it was what Dad would have wanted. I just signed what they told me to sign." He took a shaky step closer. "Sloane, I'm sorry." It was the word, the one I had never heard him speak in my entire life, an apology, an emotional appeal, sent from one family member to another, seeking amnesty. He was looking for his sister, for an ally against the legal storm that was about to inundate him. I stood there for a long, silent moment. I processed his statement. I didn't know. A claim of ignorance, a classic legal defense. She told me, shifting the blame, "I'm sorry," a plea for emotional absolution. He was looking at me, his eyes desperate. I looked back. My face, I am sure, perfectly neutral. "Put it in writing," I said. His face crumpled in confusion. "What?" "Your apology," I said, my voice quiet. "And your statement, that you were unaware of the wire transfer, that you were acting on the instruction of our mother and Elias Vance, all of it. Type it up, sign it in front of a notary, and send it to my lawyer, Arthur Jacoby." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the last bit of hope drained from his eyes. He finally understood. I was not his sister, not today. I was a hostile party in a corporate lawsuit, and a verbal sorry was just noise. A notarized affidavit, however, was evidence. I stepped around him. He didn't move. My cousin was waiting for me by the elevators. He had been given the proxies, and he was now the de facto head of the new independent committee. "Sloane," he said, offering his hand. This time, I took it. His grip was firm, dry. "That was masterful. You saved this company. You saved my uncle's legacy." "I just followed the records," I said, withdrawing my hand. "The committee is meeting at 1 p.m., he said. "All business. We want you there. We want to appoint you as an unpaid special advisor, interim chief risk officer. Perhaps we need you. Sloane, you're the only one who knows where all the bodies are buried." It was the offer, the one my mother had spent my entire life ensuring I would never get. A seat at the table, a title, power. It was tempting. For a fraction of a second, I saw a version of my future, in my father's office, rebuilding, running it all, the right way. But I looked at my cousin's honest, tired face, and I thought of my real desk, 40 floors up, at Northvale Systems. This was not my life. This was an audit, and the audit was complete. "No," I said. He looked genuinely surprised. "But Sloan, we need your guidance." "You don't need me," I corrected him. "You need this." I opened my briefcase and took out a single, encrypted, brushed aluminum USB drive. I held it out to him. "This is Project Thistle," I said. "It's the complete, unredacted file. Every email I saved for the last 3 years, every vendor contract Elias inflated, every metadata report, every social media post. The $209,000 was just the door. This is the whole room." He took the drive, holding it with a reverence I found unnecessary. It was just data. "This is the roadmap for the forensic audit team you're about to hire. Give them this, and they will find every dollar. My work here is done." "Sloan," he started. "At least, I am recusing myself from all operations," I said, cutting him off. "I am a 31% shareholder. That's all. I have my own job, and I've been out of the office for too long. Just send me the audit report when it's done." I pressed the elevator button. The brushed steel doors opened with a soft chime. Before I stepped in, I pulled out my personal phone one last time. I opened a new email. To Mother's personal email address. Subject, final. I paused. The anger from 2 nights ago was gone, burned away by the cold fire of the investigation. The pain was just a dull fact. There was nothing left to say. "I will not be pursuing a separate civil suit for defamation or emotional distress regarding your text or the exclusion. My father's codicil will be handled by the probate court. That is sufficient. I am only following the records. The corporate fraud is a separate matter. The independent committee will handle that. Goodbye." I hit send. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing me in with my own pale reflection in the polished steel. My phone did not vibrate. I knew it wouldn't. The absence of a reply was the only answer she had left. The blank space was the final record. The elevator doors opened to the ground floor lobby. I walked past the reception desk, past the large marble A embedded in the floor. The glass doors slid open, and I stepped out of the climate-controlled atrium and into the air of Westvale. It was a cold, sharp October afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. The wind was brisk. As I walked toward the parking lot, 2 employees from the shipping department were standing near the entrance, smoking. They watched me approach. They didn't smile, but they both nodded, a sign of respect. As I passed, I heard one of them say to the other, his voice low but clear, "About damn time." I didn't turn. I didn't acknowledge them. I got into my car, a quiet, nondescript sedan. I sat in the silence for a full minute, my hands on the wheel. The adrenaline of the last 48 hours finally receded, leaving behind an immense, hollow quiet. I felt clear, not victorious, not happy, just balanced. I thought of my father's last message to me, the yellow post-it note I had found in the envelope. "Sloan knows the numbers. Trust the numbers." I had, and they had, in the end, been the only thing I could. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, not once looking back. I had reached the main lobby. It was empty now, save for the front desk receptionist, who was pretending to be fascinated by her computer screen. The atrium behind me was silent. The meeting, the confrontation, the corporate reorganization. It was all happening on the floors above. In conference rooms I had no desire to enter. The machine was running. I pushed the heavy glass door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air hit me first. It was cold, sharp, biting with the metallic tang of the city in late afternoon. The sky was a pale, indifferent gray. It felt clean. "Miss Avery! Miss Avery!" The reporter from the Gazette. He had been waiting, his photographer at his side, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He jogged over, holding his phone out like a microphone. That was unbelievable, he panted, walking backward as I continued toward the parking lot. What's the next step? Are you filing criminal charges? I don't have to, I said, my voice quiet. The wind snatched at the words. I'm providing my full file to the independent committee, their auditors, and my father's codicil in probate court will do the rest. But your family, he pressed, insistent. Your mother, what if she contacts you? After all this, what if she texts you again? I stopped. I turned to face him. He was just a kid. Really, his eyes bright with the thrill of the story. He was looking for the emotional climax, the final, human piece. I thought of her text. It's over between us. The notification that had started this. If my mother texts me again, I said, my voice flat, I will archive it. His face fell, confused. Archive it? Just gave it? That's it? You won't reply? It's a record, I said. I collect records. People are going to say this was all just revenge, you know, he said, shifting his angle. That this was a cold, calculated plan to destroy your own family. This was the last piece of the narrative they would try to control. The unstable, vengeful daughter. I looked past him, at the photographer, who was raising his camera. I looked directly into the lens, into the public eye. This isn't revenge, I said, my voice clear and steady. It's reconciliation. You can't reconcile with a lie. You can only reconcile with the truth. The company's books were a lie. The family's legacy was a lie. Now, the records are true. The photographer's camera clicked. I turned away and continued walking. Wait, the reporter called out. I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard the hiss and heavy thud of the atrium's main door closing as an employee left. The sound was final, echoing slightly in the concrete canyon of the street. It was the sound of a vault being sealed. I reached my car. I got in. The silence inside was absolute. I put my phone in the cup holder. It was dark. Screen off. The storm of calls from Dylan and my mother had ended hours ago, replaced by the silence of legal terror. I didn't need to check it. I didn't need to watch for updates. The court order was filed. The resolutions had passed. The independent committee was in control. The forensic audit was, at this moment, being commissioned. The proxies were being counted. The machine was running. It didn't need me to stand and watch. I sat there for a long time. I wasn't waiting. I was just finished. I took a deep breath. It wasn't a breath of relief. The damage, the betrayal, the loss of my father, all that was permanent. A cold, hard line item in my personal ledger. This breath was something else. It was the breath you take when an impossible, chaotic equation is finally, irrevocably, solved. It was not relief. It was rightness. I started the engine. I put the car in gear. I did not look in the rearview mirror at the glass tower of Alder & Co. Foods. My mother and brother had wanted a private execution. Shrouded in the emotional, deniable darkness of family, they chose private endings. I pulled out onto the street, merging into the traffic, just another car heading home from work. I chose public records. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know your thoughts. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.